Back in our notes today, and yes, sir. They're up there, Kale, in the world history. See that orange box? Keep walking, you'll see it. Make sure you've got chapter 5. Yep. And anybody else that needs one of those to catch up your notes that you were taking at home. So we have about we have 2 full weeks of school and then 2 days before finals. Do you need one, John?
Yeah.
It's that orange box. I always have extra.
I think I do.
That's all right. If you don't have them, just go grab them. I always make extra. So here's, friends, so here's what our next 2 weeks, John, 2 weeks and 2 days looks like. We will finish this chapter not this Friday, but next Friday. And then we have 2 days before we start finals. Again, you guys are part of the fortunate bunch that this year we are not counting absences toward having to take finals, which next year might smack some of you in the face since you're not used to that. The only way and the only reason that you will have to take a final in any class is if you have more than 5 tardies, and that is not just tardies in this class. It's if you have more than 5 tardies, you have to take all of your finals. Is anybody close to having that many tardies?
I got 1.
Okay. Don't get tardies. It's the worst reason to have to take finals. Or if you got an F first 9 weeks. If you've got an F first 9 weeks, in order to get credit for this semester, you have to take the final exam. If anyone has to take the final exam, it is multiple choice questions from all the previous tests that we have. I think I have 90 questions on there that you have to answer. It is 2 hours that we're in here. Yeah, it's awful, Ella. Yeah, that face is worth it. That's why you don't want to have to take finals. It is not a fun day. For those of you that you are the oldest person in your family that has not ever had anybody come to high school before, your parents might get the pushback of school's open, you need to be there. Please make sure you encourage your parent who doesn't quite get that we don't want you here on final exam and that you don't need to be here to call the school and they will explain it. There is usually typically those students whose parents say it's a school day, you got to go to school if it's open. But this is really a time just for kids that have to take finals. If you don't have to take the final and you're here that day, it is not a fun day. It is not like junior high where you get to run around and play games and do all those things. You're going to sit quietly in a classroom for 2 hours. The bell's going to ring. You're going to go sit for 2 hours more. So that is, again, a reason why you don't want to be here. Yes, Jonathan?
So what day do we actually start? Like what day, not next week, the week after?
Your last day will be Tuesday. So we have 2 full weeks, and then we go Monday, Tuesday, and then finals are Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So for those of you that have older siblings that have been in this building and you had to get up and go to school while they got to stay home, that is your experience this year. So if you do have to take the final, that's what Monday and Tuesday will be for. I'll give you a study guide and so that you can prepare for that final exam. I do it on paper, not on Canvas, just because it's easier for me to grade than that, and it's easier for you with paper, I think. So I don't think I have anybody in that position. I don't think that had an F first 9 weeks. Some of you are skirting around that now, so please don't do that because you don't want to do that to yourself. And don't watch your tardies as well, and make sure that you're checking that it's not tardies in one class, it's tardies overall. Usually what's getting people is being late to act. So make sure you're checking everything, okay? All right, so we're ready to begin today, moving forward in our discussion of Rome. And if you are not where we're at, that means you weren't listening to my lovely, awesome lectures, which are recorded. If you need to go back and fill in your notes, make sure you go back and do that, okay? So now we're going to look at culture and society. And again, this is part of our look at civilizations and how our civilizations begin. And one of the things, again, that was part of that civilization was public works. And there is no one that we have studied more than anything that likes to build things than Romans. They like to build things, and the stuff that they built lasts a really long time. We have several sayings that we have about Rome, and crossing the Rubicon was one. Another one is that all roads lead to Rome, and that's something that probably your great-grandparents have heard. If you say that to them, they'll know what it means. Romans built lots and lots of roads. They built those roads to make connections. They built those roads for their army to travel on. They built those roads for goods to travel on, and they built really good roads. They excelled at engineering. They used domes, arches, vaults. They are the first people to use concrete, which again is something that is very specific to Rome on a massive scale, which allows them to construct huge buildings. And many of those buildings, again, still exist today. Probably one that you're most familiar with is the Colosseum. The Colosseum is destroyed like that because of war. It didn't fall down on itself because of bad engineering. Actually, it's fantastic engineering. But they built lots and lots of stuff. They have roads that exist still in the UK. Hadrian's Wall is still up in UK. That kind of separates England from Scotland is still there. Over 5 or 50,000 miles of roads, aqueducts, and bridges. Aqueducts are what brings water. And those aqueducts are everywhere in Europe that you can see. It's one of the reasons, again, history people love to visit places like Europe and Asia, is that you can put your hands and touch things that are centuries and centuries old. Aqueducts still exist. You can see them spread out all over Europe. Next look is at literature. And again, remember, that's one of the things that we talk about in a civilization, the ability to allow people to sit and create art. And remember, literature is art. The high point of literature is during the age of Augustus. Most distinguished of the poets is Virgil. And again, when a society has poets, again, it says a lot about the society that allows people to write poetry. Most famous literary work from this age was Livy's History of Rome. It's 142 books. Now, it's 142 books because their ability to make books is obviously very different. I think if we went to Books A Million, which if we picked ourselves up and went to Books A Million right now, some of us might not come back. I wouldn't come back. I would stay in Books A Million. But we could find Livy's History of Rome right now on the shelf. And I think it's either 3 or 4 big fat paperbacks. So it's 142 books because of the way bookmaking and constructing books. But it is, again, a significant work to compile the entire history of Rome. And again, most everything that we know about Rome comes from Livy. Our last look is at family, and again, this social structure. Roman family is headed by the father, and father makes decision on how children are educated. Father has the permission to use capital punishment. We're going to come to a part, I think, in this chapter where we talk about eventually fathers no longer are allowed to put their children to death for any issues that they deem necessary. Roman males ended their childhood with a special ceremony in which they gained the right to wear a purple toga. And again, purple representing that change. And most of the time, that childhood ceremony for boys is around the age of 13 or 14 when they would get this ceremony. And again, this is always held for wealthy Romans, not poor Romans. Here we go. By 2nd century, fathers had no longer had absolute control over children, and fathers can no longer kill their children. I knew it was here somewhere. Fathers could no longer kill their children. Boys and girls of both classes were educated, obviously not equally. The education that girls get would be somewhat different than what boys could get. And women could attend events, but were segregated. And that, again, is always how you know if period films do a really good job, because if you watch movies that show gladiator contest and you got men and women all mixed, you're like, well, they didn't do their research to know that women and men can't sit together in those types of settings. Even poor classes of women and men are not. If you look and you watching a period piece that's really good, like at gladiator races or gladiator fights, up at the top where the wealthy people will see, you'll usually see some kind of sheer curtain, which I think most people think it's like to keep them cool or to keep the sun out of them. It's for separation. And typically behind that curtain would be women, segregated from and away from men. So that leads us to our attitudes toward women. Roman males believe in the weakness of females, and so they needed to be under the guidance of a male. And again, that is a perpetuating belief system of most of our civilizations until we get into more modern times, that women were weak, and that is physical weakness and mental weakness. And so you had to be under the guidance of a male. Notice it doesn't say a father or a husband. It's any male. So if I am a married female and my father is dead and my husband dies, I'm under the guidance of the next oldest male in the family. It could be my son. All marriages for women were arranged. Legal ages for females to marry was 12 and boys 14. And that age of 12 is almost always associated with the beginnings of women or young girls menstruating. So the purpose of that was marriage and to create families. And so that kind of was the line of when females were allowed to marry. Please don't think, and this is where it gets creepy, that those 12-year-old girls were marrying 14-year-old boys. Most often, those 12-year-old girls were marrying 40-year-old men, in the need for those 40-year-old men to have someone to care for them and their children, and put those young girls in a lot of difficult and dangerous situations. Slavery. No people relied on slavery as much as the Romans, right? They had a tremendous number of slaves. A lot of them they get from conquering the Greeks. The Greeks were brought into Italy as slaves, different slaves. Those slaves were educated, smart, and so they were tutors, musicians, doctors, artists. The other slaves were the other people that they conquered, roads, shops, personal servants. Hopefully, I think with those of you that have watched the movie Gladiator or any of those other shows know that all of those gladiators were slaves. They either fought to hopefully secure their freedom, or they fought to advance their conditions within slavery. But all of the gladiators were slaves and were owned by Romans and used as entertainment. And that entertainment was bloodshed and cruelty and open fighting in pits that for the most part were free. Most all of those gladiator exhibitions were free to the public. It was one of the ways that Rome kept their growing poor population from revolting or rioting, and we'll see that towards the end of this next chapter. Conditions were terrible. Horrible, horrible, horrible. easy to work slaves to death and replace them than to feed and care for them. So economically, if I am a wealthy Roman citizen and I had a large plantation or large public works, for me, it's much, much easier to just keep working these people to death and getting new ones than to expend money on food, clothing, shelter to keep them alive. And that will be what will happen. Bless you. The other part of this that kept them functionally at near death's door was that Romans feared slave revolts. There are way more slaves than there are Romans in most of these far-reaching places. And as a result of that, they will, one, work them to death, minimally keep them alive with food, shelter, punishments, horrific punishments, horrible punishments. If you murdered your master, all the slaves would be killed. So part of that is in these plantations, these lafandas, there are small groups of the wealthy controlling Romans and then 300-400 slaves easily able to overthrow. But the result would be every one of you is going to die. So the thought process is if Drew starts talking about killing me, some of you are either going to tell me because you don't want to die, or you're going to keep him in check because you don't want to die. And it's not an easy, lovely death. It's not something, it is horrific death, oftentimes done, always done in front of other people. And it, again, is because there are so many slaves as compared to Romans. Most famous slave revolt was led by Spartacus. A really old movie about Spartacus. I think one of the pay channels had a show on Spartacus that lasted forever. Kept everybody's going to die. Like, how much longer are we taking this Spartacus thing out? So Spartacus was able to, in a few short months, gather up about 70,000 slaves, which again, that's a lot, not even all of them. He and those slaves will defeat the Romans a couple of times before they're going to be trapped and killed, slaughtered. What will happen to those slaves? Again, the Romans are all about a view of a kill. Like, here's what's going to happen to you. 6,000 of those slaves are going to be crucified along the road to Rome. So where the Roman army will trap and kill many of the revolt of Spartacus, they keep some of them alive. And then along the road to Rome, 6,000 crosses with these men crucified, left to die. Crucifixion is a horrific, horrible, long, lingering way to die. You slowly suffocate. Your body can't hold itself up, and you fall down on yourself and you suffocate. It's like having a pillow over your face, except it has little cracks where you can breathe. It's a suffocating, slow death. And it certainly was a reminder to all Romans, and particularly Roman slaves, that this is what's going to happen to you if you decide to revolt against the Romans. Horrible way. All right, daily life in Rome. We got about 1 million people living in Rome. It is way overcrowded. Lots of wagons, lots of noise. So what happens is they ban them during the day. So you cannot take your wagon or your cart during the day. So when would you be able to do that? At night, when everyone's trying to sleep. It is a loud, dirty city. It is dangerous. We have a huge gap between the rich and the poor, as will be in many of the places where we study. The poor are going to live in apartment blocks, They're going to be poorly built under constant threat of fire. Cities in this time period, fire was always a threat, right? Everything you did was with an open flame. You heated with an open flame, you cooked with an open flame, and those apartment blocks are built wall to wall to wall. So you shared a common wall, and once fire got started in one of those places, it would just sweep through. We don't obviously have any kind of pressurized water to be able to put fire out, and it really was a bucket brigade. You just hauled buckets of water and through. So fire was devastating to the people in Rome, and we'll have lots of different time periods where Rome will burn. One of the most serious will be, we'll get to it, under the Emperor Nero, who will begin the persecution of Christians by saying that Christians were the ones that lit Rome on fire. And again, that threat of fire and the thought that some groups of people could do that will again lead to this strong persecution of that. Rome has many, many public buildings. We kind of talked about baths with the Greeks. It's the same thing with the Romans. We have temples, we have theaters, we have markets. And one of the things that this does is to give the appearance of grandeur. Grandeur means beauty, that it's bigger than what it says it is. And that, again, is what Rome and these, especially these emperors, set out to do. They had a really difficult time providing grain and food for its people. That is, again, one of the beginnings of the fall of Rome, because this Roman Empire is going to crash hard and long. One of the beginnings is they can't feed their people. And when you are a nation, a country, a group of people that can't feed its people, that will be when trouble starts. In a history class, when we think about people turning against the government, poor people turn against the government quite often because they're poor, they lack resources. But when we think about successful rebellions or revolts, it's always done with those people in the middle class people. And in this course, and especially in my AP Euro and in APUSH, my question always will be, you need to think about what would make your mom, those of you that have normal, average moms, revolt against something. To stand with a pitchfork on a corner, to walk 3 miles to Versailles to demand the head of Louis XIV. And it's something very, very simple. I can't feed my family. That's the simple thing that would make all of your moms, me as a mom, mild to meek me, revolt against something and stand for something and pick up a pitchfork. That's what's going to happen in Rome. It's going to start with the poor people. We can't get grain to feed our food, to feed our people. So we slowly start this disintegration down. The first choice that they decide sounds like a good choice, but it's a bad one. Let's just give free food. And you can do that for a while, but somebody has to pay for that, right? Is anything ever free? No. Somewhere along the line, you have to pick up money for it. And as eventually what's going to happen is those farmers that are providing that free corn, grain, will continue to send the bill to the government, and at some point the government won't be able to pay it. And that's, again, where we'll have this spiral going down. So the next thing they want to do is to provide entertainment. That's one of the ways that you can make the focus from this bad thing to a good thing. And so what Rome will do is we're going to give you lots of entertainment. And that will be what the poet Juvenal says. 2 things, bread and circuses. So we give them free bread. We give them circuses, meaning entertainment. They'll stop worrying about all the things that are wrong. And for the most part, it's true. And those circuses become things like chariot races at Circus Maximus. Chariot races, again, are very simple races around making laps around the big giant Colosseum. Those chariot races were not done by slaves. Those were done by Roman soldiers. Gladiator shows, again, those are by slaves, and those will be all types of fights. There will be one person on one person with different types of weapons. There'll be groups of people fighting. Eventually, and there'll be animals, they'll fight bears and lions. Eventually, as the persecution of Christians continue to rise, Christians will be brought into these gladiator shows. And again, what these people desire is as bloody and gory as possible. One of the many, I don't want to call it not some factually based ideas of thumbs up, thumbs down comes from gladiators. Is if the fight was a good fight, and as the gladiator that's going to win has the other guy pinned on the ground and is about to kill him, looks up at the emperor. Was it a good fight? If it was a good fight, thumbs up, let the guy live to fight another day. If it was a bad fight, thumbs down, kill the guy. And oftentimes the crowd participated in that thumbs up, thumbs down. Most historians tell us that crowd was a very bloodthirsty mob that desired these shows. They were widely attended, thirsting for blood, watching all of those things occur. We have lots and lots of good historical references of what those battles entailed and what they looked like. They were vicious. And then festivals, honoring gods and all of those things. So we're going to stop there, but don't start moving. If you look at the title for tomorrow, Rise of Christianity. So this is when we move into the discussion of the religion of Christianity in a classroom. And it is going to look very different than what perhaps those of you that are people of faith that hear in the stories in a house of worship. It's the same story, just told differently. And I think probably one of the things that is probably most different is the central figures of this story is not Jesus. The central figures of this story are the apostles, because they are the ones that spread. And if you look at what our topic is, the rise of Christianity and the spread of Christianity. So in that aspect, and again, for those of you that are uncomfortable with hearing, like your history teacher just say Jesus, he's a real person, lived, died on the Roman census with his mother Mary and his dad Joseph. The whole story, that biblical story, is a true story, and it is part of the history of Rome. It is also certainly an important part of the history of Europe and the religious world. I've taught this for a very long period of time. I try my best to be as sensitive to every range, those believers to non-believers. But again, our discussion of the faith of Christianity is not necessarily, it isn't religious. It's what those changes bring to the world, especially of Rome. Okay? Questions, anybody? Questions? Okay. We're kind of ahead where we should be as far as like assignments, because this would be, so we don't have an assignment today. I know that's rather shocking, but we don't.